Hello and welcome back to another spoiler episode of Umineko. This is going to spoil the entirety of the game. I will talk with the assumption that you know everything. Well, you know the entirety of the game. I don't expect you to know everything. It will be covering episodes 4, parts 12 and 13 of my Let's Play. Content warning in this video for child abuse and child neglect. It'll be a lot of the early sections. The timestamps will have a little CW flag on any of the ones where that is a relevant content warning. So, let's dive in with a section I forgot was even here. In my last spoiler video, several comments alluded to there being a good scene with Rosa coming up and some further development on some of the stuff I had been discussing. I didn't even remember this was here. I think some worthwhile context for when I first played Umineko. This is only my second time playing it. I think I said that in episode 0, but just to reiterate, my first time through, episode 4 became a bit of a struggle in that it is difficult stuff to read about, but honestly also I was having a difficult time pacing episode 4 properly. I was reading in quite small chunks quite a lot. I would read a section that would not even be a full, say, video from this Let's Play. I would read maybe 20-30 minutes to try and just chip away at it. Just in general, that's the way I like to read anything. Books, visual novels, etc. I like having discrete chunks to be able to go through and finish and move on, and both for Higurashi and Umineko, they're a little bit longer than I would do in a single sitting, akin to watching like an episode of a TV show. So they kind of just are a little bit too long for that, and inconsistent enough that you never know when it's going to stretch a little bit more. And so I found this a lot for episode 4, that there was a lot of the early section that I thought would end sooner than it did. Especially because of how directly it starts to engage with Rosa's abuse. And I think it's intentional that you are supposed to almost be in an... Well, I think it's intentionally written as if you might be a reader who's in an Erica mode who wants to get to the fun murder puzzles and is maybe uncomfortable with the extremely raw and close depictions of abuse, bullying, and trauma that are happening with both Maria and Anji. And those are obviously key parts of Umineko, and this episode makes more of a clear statement that if you're going to read this, these things matter, and if you don't care about these, you are ignoring a huge chunk of what this story is. And it's not that I didn't care about them, but on a first time read through, having so much of this stuff so consistently and so packed tight together, which lasted for me honestly maybe a month of reading time because of how I was reading it, means that quite a lot of it started to wash over me at a point as I was kind of waiting for a change in mode. And so, we have this scene with Rosa, which is a lot. I again feel the need to point out that in this section, it is said in Umineko that characters are not fully acting out of character. Again, I think of Eva Triss as being a demonstration of what happens when someone quite strongly breaks character. The witch that is thrust upon Ava does not actually fit her. As much as it superficially could, especially to a person who doesn't know her that well, it doesn't truly fit. There is a break that happens. That is not to say Ava could never kill people. That is not to say Ava could never be cruel, because we know for sure she could be cruel. And a pretty clear running theme in Umineko is that pretty much anyone could kill given certain circumstances. But there is a way in which the personality of Ava Triss just pushes too far beyond the bounds of what Ava herself would do, that creates the character split. Given that, Rosa herself in this section is Rosa. This is a version of Rosa, this is an expression of Rosa that I believe is genuine again, a version of genuine, because we have simultaneously also seen the version of Rosa where she does love her daughter, where she cares more about her than some gold, where all she wants when push comes to shove is to save her daughter. Again, the end of episode 2, that episode was written purposefully to be a redemption of Rosa is the wrong word, but that was certainly written to give Maria a narrative where she could be powerful, useful, and that her mother could demonstrate love for her that does exist but is not often being demonstrated or acted upon. And despite what this section is going to be about and contain, there is some sympathy for Rosa pretty early on. There's an interesting moment where she wakes up, having basically found herself in this weird, cold, dark space, but her immediate internal narration is, oh god, I fell asleep on the floor again, I need to stop doing this. That paints, again, a bit of the picture that Rosa is not taking good care of herself either. Rosa is a character pulled by many different needs and wants and attempts to use coping mechanisms to make herself acceptable in the eyes of other people. And as much as this does harm Maria much more than it harms Rosa, you can see the ways in which it does also harm Rosa. Rosa herself is not entirely satisfied with the life she is living or the things she is doing, but Rosa sees herself as having little options. The ways in which she considers herself a victim are demonstrative of this because she thinks she is trapped at all times. This is a trauma that she will have as a youngest sibling of multiple older siblings who bully her, and has at least one abusive parent, and has constantly been shoved into roles of both having to be a well-performing child of the Shuramiya family, but not too well-performing to ever show up any of her other siblings. Again, Rosa has a lot of things going on and happening to her, and I do like that this section, that will show many of her sins, begins with a brief passage that hints towards the ways she too is suffering. Because in particular, knowing what we know about Rosa, it's not too clear why she would just be falling asleep in a chair or on the floor. It's not really that she's working herself to the bone, because we know she takes random holidays and lies to Maria about it. We know she talks a lot about staying late at work, but not necessarily doing so. So I don't read this so much as, oh, I'm a workaholic and I'll fall asleep in my office chair, as much as I read this of Rosa falling asleep in bad places because she's not simply making healthier choices about maintaining normal sleep habits, or she's just... There may be cases of her staying up and working late. There may be other cases where she simply just doesn't go to bed because she's instead worked up about something, thinking about something, or just won't bring herself to go and do something simple that will benefit her health overall. I get the impression that this is just something Rosa kind of lets happen sometimes. In the ways in which she thinks of herself as lacking agency, I could very much imagine the version of Rosa just falling asleep in a chair and just going, ugh, what am I doing? I should stop doing this. And she just lets it happen sometimes. Sakutaro appears both to be a means of escape for Rosa, at least in theory, since she rejects it and is not able to get herself out of there, and yet Sakutaro also appears to be a kind of retribution against Rosa, as when he says Uryu, which is pretty strikingly similar to Uu, Maria's magic word, it happens to cause her intense pain. I like the layers of what's happening here, in that Sakutaro clearly says this because it resembles Maria's tick, and Sakutaro says it for similar reasons to Maria, as a magic word of comfort and security, and kind of a thing he will say when he has nothing else to say. A little moment of reaction that is supposed to just be responsive without necessarily being a verbal response, without necessarily putting a response into words. And Rosa hates it. Rosa hates it because it is literally physically causing her pain. But the pain it is causing her is self-inflicted. This is comeuppance being visited upon Rosa for what she did to Sakutaro, what she did to Maria. She views it as purely this kid is doing this to me, even though Sakutaro is clearly trying to rescue Rosa and take her away from the evil witch Maria. But Rosa, much as she was unable to recognize the support that Sakutaro in real life gave to Maria, is unable to recognize the ways in which this Sakutaro is trying to save her. She is simply pulling away and instead goes towards Maria in this moment. And I think it's interesting that Rosa feels the pain and is very instinctive and reactive to it. She doesn't, not to say in a moment like this you would necessarily psychoanalyze the reason something is causing you pain, but she doesn't manage to pick up on this. It's a pretty clear metaphor happening, and she's just like, I gotta go away, this kid's obviously hurting me. And overall, Rosa's reactions in this section are a little unusual because she's almost more childlike than normal, which maybe is the kind of way Rosa might operate when backed into a corner normally. In some ways, being childlike is an expression of just not putting up guarded social systems. People kind of have ways of interacting where, generally speaking, being more polite is more often than not just regulating how you say and act for other people. So the idea of Rosa coming off here as more childish might just be because she is more instinctively reacting to things without moderating her words and actions as much. But she specifically has the thought, whereas Maria, I'm only able to be me because Maria's there for me. Which is such a loaded sentence because it is indicating the ways in which Rosa loves Maria. But there is a strange selfishness in the love in that phrase. Rosa does love Maria, but there's a way in which Maria is an accessory and a support for Rosa, which is very inverted. Rosa is the mother who should be supporting her daughter. Maria should be able to be the person she is because Rosa is there for her. But Rosa eats at the person that Maria is. Rosa undermines Maria being herself. Maria has to hide herself from Rosa because she knows that if she is her real self in front of Rosa, she will be scolded for it and will have the things that allow Maria to be Maria taken away. And interestingly, Rosa hides things from Maria too. Rosa hides her dating from Maria because she knows she shouldn't be doing it, she feels guilty about it, and so she has to dance around what she is doing. So I don't know what person she is saying that she is because Maria is there for her. It feels like Maria is a tether for Rosa that can help Rosa feel like there is something to her life. I have said before, at least thus far, I don't see a lot of evidence of Rosa caring about her company. I don't see a lot of evidence of... I see lots of evidence that Rosa doesn't care about the Ashuramiya name or the honor of the Ashuramiya family. She has a lot of obligations where she feels compelled to do something so that she is not scolded for doing nothing, but she is not invested personally in the success of these things. She's not invested in any way more than just simply, I must do this because it is what is expected of me. So I don't know what kind of me Maria allows her to be. The most we see Rosa pursue in terms of wanting something for herself is trying to find a husband, and doing that pulls her away from Maria because of things we'll get to later in the section. But a lot of that is, in many ways, if that's what her real self is, she's driving a wedge between herself and Maria by pursuing that. I think in a lot of ways Rosa doesn't really know what she wants, is kind of the main issue. So I think there is a sense in which Rosa wants to be a mother to Maria, but I think Rosa shirks the responsibilities and realities of that too much for it to ever be a real relationship and a real role she is fulfilling, at least from the sections we've seen. Obviously, again, if we were to stretch things into the future, I don't think it's impossible for Rosa to have become a better mother and have done more for Maria, but I think in terms of what we see on screen, she is simply not fulfilling that role. The person she is being is not a mother. So in a sense, I get the feeling that Maria serves as a proof of her being a mother, a way to placate herself and feel better about the idea of being a mother without her doing the kind of legwork she should be doing. Rosa, as I have said in some of the comments, one of the more complicated characters in this game that embodies multiple different points on the spectrum of a victim to abuser and several other things. I think there's so much going on with her that we will probably have to continue to revisit this in future. But this line really stands out to show the ways in which Rosa is not a straightforward awful person, even as much as she is still an awful person. And nothing embodies this duality better than the moment where, in rejecting the Sakutaro that's trying to take her away from Maria, she effectively causes the death of Sakutaro again as she sees the remains of a stuffed animal fall to the floor. Rosa herself says she's overcome with two emotions. She names one of them as regret, as she tries to apologize and reconcile with Maria, and the other is a frustration that bubbles up quickly, especially as Maria doesn't unthinkingly fully accept her reconciliation. I've said before that a big thing in the cycle of abuse that is happening with Rosa and Maria is that Rosa will be deeply abusive, deeply hurtful, and then will, in the moment that the frustration and anger has abated, feel regret and try to reconcile, but it is a false reconciliation. An apology is meaningless if it doesn't come with an actual attempt to avoid doing the same thing over again. If you are simply saying, I'm sorry, but this will happen again, then you're not really making any amends. You are not doing anything. You are simply going through the motions of apologizing. And that is what Rosa does, especially the ways in which she quickly switches from the feeling of someone who has hurt another person to a feeling of being a victim. Because when she wants to reconcile with Maria, that's her understanding that she has fucked up, she has done something she needs to make up for. And then the other emotion is the ways in which she justifies herself as a victim. And given the tiniest bit of a push, she jumps to it. Given Maria not fully endorsing and accepting an apology, Rosa is then like, well, what do you want me to do? I actually did very well, to be honest, because you are deeply frustrating, you're doing X and Y and Z, it's all your fault and this other person's fault, but it has nothing to do with me. She literally, in the narration, says, after all, she refused to make up with me even though I'd apologized, and there was nothing else I could do now anyway, and it was all Maria's fault in the first place. This faux helplessness, in a way, feels like an echo of one of Rosa's original traumas, where she inadvertently caused the death of Beatrice II. Rosa did not have a lot of options in that moment. Rosa was in a position of being mostly, victim is not even necessarily the right word, but lacking a lot of agency, and having not being terribly culpable for what happened. But I think that is an early memory in which Rosa cemented the idea that she could have done literally nothing else, both beforehand and in the aftermath. Umineko as a whole talks a lot about the idea of being too fixated on the past to ever do anything in the present or the future. Rosa being too fixated on what has already happened with Beatrice II prevented her from dealing with that situation in any way. She tells people during one of the family conferences, but in a way that makes it clear she's never talked to anybody about this. She kept it bottled up. And I don't even mean necessarily in the sense of getting justice for Beatrice. Minor note that I think she must have told Genji. I believe she told Genji. This is an important note for how Beatrice III comes about, but in terms of Rosa's character, she did not talk to anybody about it in any meaningful way. She didn't address the situation. And I don't even mean necessarily for getting more justice or support for Beatrice II, but I mean in the sense of she herself needed to process this better and talk it through and come to more healthy conclusions, because the trauma of this leads to coping mechanisms that then get misused later. Her lack of agency in this situation is not a lie, but she ends up extending it to situations where, of course, she can do more with her child. Of course, she has more agency in the situation where she has destroyed her child's support. She can offer other means of support. She can meaningfully do something to start to help her child's life and stop keeping her at a distance and being purely frustrated with her. There is so much Rosa can do that she does not engage with. And I think the roots of that come from a situation and an upbringing where she did lack agency and is now unwilling to recognize the difference between these situations, because the trauma has led to a state where she is too quick to jump to feeling this powerlessness as a way to not deal with guilt. There's briefly I will mention one very good example of some of this false reconciliation that Rosa continues to do. In the conversation where Maria is on the phone talking to Rosa and Rosa's lying, claiming she has to stay late for work, she suggests, "Oh, tomorrow I'll buy you a cake." And Maria quite frankly says, "I don't want cake. I would like more time with you. If you go buy cake, you're wasting time you could spend with me." To which Rosa does not address and instead goes, "Don't worry, I'll get cake and I'll be home early." And one thing I didn't say, but I've said in the past, is that part of how this cycle ends up working is that Rosa then feels like she's gone above and beyond. Rosa feels like she has gone, "I bought you cake and got home early. I did so many things to placate you. How dare you not be fully conciliatory because of what I have done." Rosa makes it herself feel as though she has done so much for Maria that Maria should feel indebted, that she then gets even more frustrated when the next loop happens where she does get frustrated with Maria, because Rosa, by doing nice things for Maria, just gives herself fuel for being frustrated. Because Rosa is just a doting mother, but who is not being appreciated for any of the nice things she is doing that her child explicitly said she didn't need. And the back half of this conversation is also just some incredible Rosa mishandling every angle of this situation, where she's in a hotel room with the guy she's on a date with, on a trip away with, and he responds to the idea that she didn't tell her daughter that she was going on a trip, and Rosa interprets this as, "Oh, so you don't like women with children," when reading these lines, it's pretty clear to me that he's like, "This is a little bit fucked up. You're telling me you left your child alone, didn't even tell her you were on a trip, and literally just lied to her about working. I'm incredibly uncomfortable with this situation." But Rosa can only interpret it in a way that has nothing to do with her actions. Especially the ways in which she's not thinking of even the idea that people are put off by her having a child. She doesn't process that as if she, having had a child, is somehow less desirable. She almost treats it like it is a detail divorced from her. Just the idea that she is saddled with this burden puts people off. And you can really feel in this situation the ways in which she uses this constantly as an excuse to feel better about guys breaking up with her or cutting ties with her. She will consistently blame Maria as the reason why she is alone and never possibly examine her own actions or how bad her vibes might be on dates like this. And then, of course, near the end of this section, Maria has a quiet moment where She is indulging in her revenge. She is effectively doing similar things to what Rosa would do when she would abuse Maria, of taking out her frustrations on the perpetrator of her misery. In Maria's case, she's much more correct about who that perpetrator is, but there's a pretty clear mirroring in that Maria herself acknowledges this isn't fixing anything. This is not leading to more positive results. It won't bring back Sakutaro. It won't really fix her mother. It won't actually get rid of the bad witch. But Maria doesn't have a lot of other options, and so continues. This is a pretty tragic moment of the corrosive nature of this revenge, because as much as you can question, does Rosa necessarily deserve this, the more pertinent point in this moment is that Maria's not doing herself any favors here. This revenge is corroding Maria herself, where she once had Sakutaro as an emotional support that she could use to rationalize her mother's love. With Sakutaro gone, she instead leans on Beatrice as a way of doing harm to make herself feel better. While Anji would certainly make the argument that leaning on Sakutaro was telling herself lies that don't lead to anything good, I would not say that flipping the script and suddenly leaning on Beatrice to do revenge is better. I would categorically call it worse. Again, it's complicated by the nature of Maria's personhood after the incident on Rokkenjima and what person she has left to be. But in this moment, with the Maria that is here, with the witch we see in front of us, it's not going to be good for her. It doesn't ultimately help her, because it is a cycle with no end. It does not lead to change in any positive sense. Well, I guess with how this scene ends, there is a way in which this witch is the Maria on the island of Rokkenjima for this particular family conference. So again, there is a person here who is going through this magical murder over and over again because of her lack of alternative options. After which we move into a very interesting magical segment, in a way I enjoy, where I named the video after a Zero Escape reference of Seek a Way Out, where it's a very funny scene to me because this is a magical scene where none of this is happening, at least not as described. The whole setup of asking, oh, what's the logical explanation of how we fell from the dining hall into this cell? And like explaining all the inconsistencies and how that doesn't work, but still trying to logic it through. You get to see Kyrie using Battler's approach in a fun way, where she's a lot cleverer about it than he is, but she's still not finding the point at which she goes, so wait, this is all fake, right? This can't have happened. She kind of still clings to the idea of, could there be some sort of fast-acting drug that knocked us out, that we were then dragged down here? But it's a cruel trick because she is in the scene as the fictional construct, the piece that is Kyrie in this moment, is in a reality and is trying to make sense of it, not realizing that she's been plucked out of a reality where her rationalizations make sense. She is trying to use the logic of the real world that she is no longer in. And the thing I find very funny about it is that in many ways this scene is not especially magical. The hints that this is a magical scene are the fact that Kinzo is alive at all, and the fact that Shannon and Cannon are both present. They even call this out in a funny hint way of like, it's rare that both of us get to survive the first Twilight, because of the way in which, in most cases, it would be difficult to write around both of them existing as the group starts to consolidate and people are way more aware of the movement of different people, and you would be limited by Shannon and Cannon sharing a body. And of course, in this scene, Kyrie and Kraus would take note of the fact that Shannon and Cannon are the same body. And of course, there's also some magical bunny gun girls that appear, and those are obviously magical too. But the thing that is funny to me is that the reality they are in and the actions being taken are all very grounded. They try to seek a way to break down the bars, they look for anything they could use to help them escape the situation they're in. They happen upon a phone, and using this technology, they do what they can to contact the outside and get a degree of leverage or security. These are all extremely mundane things. These are things you could do in a mystery scene. But the idea of a murder mystery where a bunch of people got captured and put in a jail cell, even without the magical means being involved, already feels a bit weird. And this is very much an episode that goes off script is maybe not the way to put it, but goes off genre in several ways. And this feels like one where Kyrie is almost trying to act as if there is a mystery to unpack here, when in reality their pieces got shuffled around a bit, and they're basically being held onto as a means of using for a sacrifice later. Though we will see that they actually in fact do get to escape, and we'll follow that stuff. I'm gonna enjoy untangling what happens there. Plus there's some very good scenes. But all in all, one thing that I find with Kyrie specifically, and to an extent Kraus, it is funny how both of them have not gotten a lot of screen time. In both cases, they tend to get killed off relatively quickly. At the very least, they don't stick around super long, especially not to be particularly prominent characters, and especially not as a pairing. But in this case, them being the surviving two assure me as ish. Obviously, Kyrie's status is more wobbly than that, but it's a fun setup to give both of them more time on screen and more focus on screen, but at the same time it feels like it's teasing Kyrie specifically by putting her in a situation where her approach, her logic doesn't really make a lot of sense and doesn't really manage to help all that much, and is just baffling to her. And this is another one where I am wondering who wrote this episode. Obviously, I mean in fiction. Who wrote this tale of Rokkenjima? Because it would have to be someone who somewhat knows Kyrie, and there's a lot of Anji and there's a lot of Maria stuff. And in the fiction of Umineko, I'm not entirely clear where the borders on that stuff is. Are we, as people playing Umineko the game, getting external knowledge that is not written into the story? Are we technically, as people playing the real life game, getting kind of between the lines? Are we getting extrapolated information that is technically in the story of Rokkenjima? What I mean by that is there a fourth story of Rokkenjima that is written that basically just takes place on the island and just does the straightforward story, but that what it does is have enough context and reflections that someone who's reading it could intuit the Anji and Maria backstory we're getting now. This is kind of very big metafictional questions I have, but the part of it that I think is most useful in terms of actually thinking through the analysis and stuff is wondering who is writing Kyrie into the situation and what is their relationship to her and how do they feel about her. Because if this is a story being written by Toya, is this a weird way of Toya thinking about the limitations of this way of thinking and the way in which the false sense of security this way of thinking gives a person ends up kind of becoming an issue when you're not confronted with a nail but you're still hitting it with a hammer? I will have to think about it further as the rest of this episode unfolds, because of the way this episode is so different for the rest of this. The other thing that's really good in this scene is that we have another wolves and sheep puzzle where there are 3 wolves and 2 sheep. Again, depending on how strongly you want to categorize the wolves, it's pretty clear that Canon, Shannon, and Nanjo are all likely accomplices, and Kyrie's pretty aware of that. But she doesn't have the privacy to have an aside conversation with Kraus to talk about this. I think, and that hesitation is very intentional, I think Kraus is clever enough to understand the likely betrayers in their midst. But Kyrie can't do any more advanced theorizing about it. She can only attempt to escape and do what she can to get them out of there. That is honestly most of what I want to say about this section, aside from, I guess, quick little whodunit corner at the very end here. I still don't think I have a lot to explain. It's all a magical narrative. It's fabricated. I think the phone call is the most we have detective perspective to go on, which is that Battler did get to talk to Kyrie, presumably. We don't get explicit words from Kyrie. We do get things that... we do get words that Kraus says, and we get that lots of different people talk to them, and presumably nothing completely out of left field gets said, otherwise it probably would have been brought up, because I don't think that cousins are hiding anything from each other, so anyone in that room would have heard anything particularly strange. But they are all hostages. I think they're just under duress, being told to call the children without explicitly being allowed to... They're both not being given a very explicit script, but they're very clearly being told to talk around things and to not acknowledge things because they need to present the correct narrative, including the idea that they got to do a little sneaky call, and then not too long after they're going to have to call again to explain the test and send all the kids out in their proper order. Again, it's going to be a while before we get any red text to really drill down into this stuff, but for now, I simply don't think I need to say much. So that is going to do it for this spoiler episode. Thank you all for watching and listening. Thank you for all the comments people leave too. There's a lot of extra fun conversation that happens there that sometimes feeds into the next video. Like me going, oh shit, there's so much Rosa stuff still coming. But that's all for this time. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.